Welcome back to Balanced, where each month Steve and I attempt to examine and discuss a philosophical topic using reason, logic, and common sense. And this is episode 14. We're now in season 2. And this episode marks a pivot in, I guess, the format of the show, really, because based on some feedback from listeners, and also, as a result of looking at some of the data, because of course we can see, which episodes, for example, have the most listens. It seemed like people are enjoying, and I think it's fair to say that Steve and I have been enjoying more the conversations that are, I think, more philosophical, less political in nature. So we are making some changes to the podcast, and episodes going forward will have a little bit more of a philosophical bent to them and be more interesting to listen to.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So I think the way to put it most simply for me is the conversations that seemed more interesting, that we seemed to enjoy more, and that we seemed to come away or get more out of were the ones that weren't showing this sort of like left versus right sort of outlook and trying to meet in the middle, even though we often did that anyway. So to start us off, this episode 14, mortality. We talked about getting philosophical, Ben, and
It's a big one.
It's a big one right away, right? So first things first, what does mortality mean to you? I would ask you that question, Ben.
When I hear the word, I think of the human lifespan, the lifespan of your physical body, your physical embodiment.
Yeah, and when I was doing some research on this, most of what comes up, like you said, lifespan, most of what comes up immediately is, average lifespan for men and women, or different countries or different areas or different. And so they're talking about rates, and this is not really what we're talking about. I feel like, there's something to that, to think about that and talk about that. But I think that places a sense of urgency on what mortality means to me is just the life that you have within you is not permanent. Initial thoughts, I would pose the question, why is mortality, or at least the consideration of our own mortality, why do you think that's an important topic to discuss?
Well, I think one reason it's important is because I think that there's a huge segment of the population that avoids honest and reason-based consideration of mortality, of their own and in general. We've talked about religion on the podcast many times, and religion is one mechanism by which people kind of deny their own mortality in a way.
Yeah. And we are going to get into religion. It's interesting. I really thought you were going to say right there that it's a topic or a subject that most people sort of ignore because it's unpleasant to think about.
That's true too.
And the way I look at it is like, if people don't consider it, like, you just might be wasting time, right? Like, there's always tomorrow to get to something.
Sure.
And maybe that's not true. So I went to the dictionary and wanted to define mortality, because everything was coming up, the lifespans and different things like that, statistics, right? But I wanted to define it. It's a simple definition: the state or condition of being subject to death.
Oh, that is interesting, because that's basically just saying, when we talk about mortality, we're talking about the fact that we are all going to die.
Yes. I think that's nice and simple. So to me, and I know we've had this type of discussion before a little bit, like I said, I really started to face in my mind mortality when I had my 50th birthday, and I said to myself, like, hey, halfway, man. So, it's not permanent. It's not permanent.
Right. And it seems like the younger you are, the easier it is to pretend that, or to not really realize that this is all fleeting?
Yeah, it's like it's like swimming in a pool or something. It's like eventually you're going to get tired, you're going to wear out. At first, it's fun, it's wet, it was hot out, you jump in the pool. But if for some reason you can't get to the edge, you need to you have to think about that, right? And when you're first in, you're a young kid, you're not thinking about it. Once you've been in for a while, you're like, hey, this is like, I'm not going to last here forever, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it makes me think of that terrible experiment about hope. Have you heard of that? With the rats.
Oh no, I don't think so.
So just real quick, because it's worth it, talking about having hope for something they did. And who's they, I don't remember. Right. But there's, you could look up like rat swimming or drowning experiment and it would come up. So these researchers put these like rats in like a glass, tube where they can swim and stay above, their heads above water. And then eventually I think the average was like 13 minutes and the rat would go under and would just be starting to drown and then they'd have to get it out. Right. Like, so in 13 minutes, it gives up. But if they would, right when it starts to go under, they took some rats and they took them out. And then the experiment was these same rats would go back in later and they did it for like 17 hours because they were like, oh no, hope is like, I got saved last time. Like there's still a chance.
Yeah.
Whereas the first time, or rats that just, and it's terrible to drown animals for an experiment.
Of
I'm just
course.
going to say that. But those rats are just like, hey, I'm tired, man. I'm going under. Boom, done. Right. But the ones that they gave hope, just in that small brain, that experience, like, hey, no, I can get out. And they lasted hours and hours and hours. So
Yeah. So they were conditioned to believe that at any moment they could be plucked.
yeah. It's interesting. We talk about mortality. I don't know how that really applies, but it just made me think of that. Talking about thinking that you have all this time for death. Or before death. So I went to science because really when I think about mortality, and if you have an argument and someone doesn't want, or someone wants to ignore it, the way that I would think they're going to say, well, I don't want to think about it. I'm going to ignore it. Maybe I'll live forever type of, or I don't, why wouldn't you think of it? Right. So there is a species that has been called biologically immortal. Did you know that?
I did not.
It is the jellyfish. I'm going to mess this name up. Turritopsis dornii. Before death, they can actually turn back time by reverting to an earlier stage of their life cycle if they get in a situation. And I read about it. It's very complex, but trust me, it happens. If they get to a situation, it's like almost going back to like an embryonic stage. It's different for a jellyfish, but think of just how simple celled organisms are. And it sort of goes back and says, let's start over here, instead of if it sees itself in a time where it's dying out for lack of proper, nourishment or things of that nature.
Wow. That raises some interesting questions though, because if it's essentially a reset, if it's able to biologically reset,
yes,
as it, I guess, grows for the second time, is it the same being? In other words, does it have the same, by being, I mean, like, does it have the same personhood? I guess person wouldn't really apply. Is it the same jellyfish hood? Because you know what I mean? It's like, is it the same being inside, or is it a full reset and it's just able to kind of start over from scratch?
And I don't know. I think genetically it's the same probably, but and you would have to, I think the jellyfish hood of it or whatever, that I think you'd have to establish some sort of consciousness or stream of consciousness maybe first before you could even ask
right.
that
Does
question.
it retain the memories of its
Yeah.
first life and all that stuff? Well, that's very thought provoking.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's the science. There is an example that you could scientifically say, well, sort of immortal. But how about humans? So I went to livescience.com, just a simple website with a lot of good information. Here's the deal. Can humans be immortal? No, it's impossible because our bodies are super complex. What does that mean? So we have stem cells they can repair and even regrow parts of the body. This happens in the liver, for example. But the body is not made up entirely of these stem cells, right? Because we're so complex, we need to do things. We need cells that do special things other than just divide and make new cells, like maybe a jellyfish, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you take our red blood cells; they do not. That's why people need
Transfusion.
transfusions. Maybe sometimes red blood cells transport oxygen around the body, and the body does create red blood cells, but the red blood cells themselves don't divide, because they just have that function. So once we make cells commit to a function, in doing that, they have to lose the ability to divide.
Hmm.
So that means cells actually age. As those cells age and get old, so do we, because they can't renew themselves like that jellyfish.
And this is actually a function of the code that is written into the DNA, right?
Yeah.
It as it replicates, each copy is slightly less, I guess, slightly less high fidelity than the one that made it, and over time, that's how you get the effective aging. Is that that's
Uh,
probably oversimplifying it, but I think that's the gist.
yeah, the gist of, I'm sure there's some scientists, like,
Shaking their
oh,
head.
yeah, pulling his hair out right now, saying, "These guys, man," right? But hey, we're just normal guys having a discussion, as we've said many times in the past. So the bottom line is, a human will break down eventually and age, and we see it. There are things that can slow it down. As at this point, right now, nothing has been developed that um, people would say, "Oh, like we can be immortal," right? So
Yeah. Well, so okay, off the cuff, I
yeah,
have read a couple articles recently that seem to suggest that we are, as a species, we are approaching the cusp of a level of understanding of the mechanics of aging and how to potentially diffuse some of them. So, and there's really two pathways. One is that you unlock the genetics in such a way that you essentially halt aging, I guess, in theory.
yeah,
So there's some process or procedure that humans will be able to have at some point in the future that kind of either makes you age much more slowly or stops you aging from whatever point you have this this procedure. And of course, the other version of it is where your consciousness is essentially,
yes, that's
uh
that's
oh,
yeah.
are we going to get there?
No, no, I just was going to say that's what I had heard that. I thought that's what you were going to bring up. People saying we could actually take your consciousness and, like, sort of like, that's like the software,
Right,
um,
right, right.
and the memory, and actually, like, if you could get to a point where you could, like, sort of upload everything, your consciousness and your memories in your brain into it like a computer, and then when your body dies,
Or you make a clone, because we can do that, and then you have a clone. You download the consciousness into the clone, and it's you with your personhood, all your memories and experience in a fresh new body.
yeah, yeah. Which, hey, it sounds like science fiction to me, but who knows, right?
It's mind blowing. It raises a lot of ethical questions about, as my grandfather used to say, we're all on a merry-go-round here, and some people have to get off so other people can get on. So, if we unlock this ability to not age, or to have your consciousness downloaded, you can continue on. Well, that obviously that doesn't work for everyone. We can't all just continue living forever. The world would be too crowded.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. That is sort of mind blowing to think about. Who knows if we'll get there? I think it's easier said than done, for sure, like
Of
most
course.
things are.
Right.
Um, but I wanted to switch over to religion now, because there's a lot of people who talk about immortality in religion, right? Most of the religions in the world believe in, like, an immortal soul sort of thing that lives on in some form.
Hmm.
So this is true in Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i, which I was on vision.org reading about this. I don't know what Baha'i is. Um, as well as native and tribal religions throughout Africa, the Americas, and elsewhere, believe there's some part lives on. whether it's a soul or whatever. Most people who don't believe, though, in religion sort of dispute that idea and say that there's just nothingness once you die. It's just nothingness, and hopefully someone else,
Oblivion.
yeah, someone gets on. But this is really interesting. In this vision.org website, there's a late professor of Jewish studies. Did not put where he taught, but Alan F. Segal or Siegel wrote that each religion's views of the rewards and punishments of the afterlife reflect the particular values and aspirations of that culture in this life. So he was sort of saying, if you live on forever, if there's a heaven, if there's wherever else the place is, it's just really reflective of what those people's values are here. So that's why they're so different. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a keen observation.
That suggests that those notions of immortality are just a human construct. That's what he was getting at.
Right. Well, yeah. And I think that makes sense. Of course, like we've gotten into religion many times on, on the podcast. And I think I've expressed before that religion seems to be, to the outside observer, it seems to be in many ways nothing more than, a coping device for this idea that you yourself, that everyone that you love, everything that you know, all the pleasure and enjoyment that exist in the world, that's all going to cease one day. Once we have existed, it becomes almost impossible to imagine not existing. I think that's a human condition. As I've said before, humans are really the only animals that live with this knowledge, that have to cope with this knowledge of their own eventual death.
Like a dog or a cat's not thinking like, oh, I could die, but
I think that I look at my cat. I think that he thinks that this is just that this is just going to be forever. This is just what it is. I'm gonna eat. I'm gonna lay in the sun. We're gonna hang out. I'm gonna get He doesn't realize it's all temporary.
So that means like then if they see something that is a threat, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just imagining now getting in my dog's head. If she sees something that's a threat and is like, oh, I'm running, if that's just like programmed in.
I think it's instinctual. I think that there's certainly a revulsion from physical pain. I mean, all living creatures have the capacity to experience pain, and it makes sense to want to avoid that. But does your dog understand that, like, oh, if I run out in front of the car, it ends everything?
No, I don't think so. But like I would say, then what I was thinking of, let's say there's like a pack of coyotes and my dog gets cornered and then like starts running to get away. Is she thinking when she's running, like, I'm going to be eaten? I don't know,
Yeah. I mean, it could be that animals just have that they're much more connected to the natural order.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to look at the world through the same kind of, lens that we do, where we have this comparatively godlike understanding of everything.
Yeah. So like this cursed outlook of what reality really holds for us, right?
Right.
So listen, and then again, I'm still on vision.org because if it suggests what that professor said, that notions of immortality are purely human construct. This is basically what many anthropologists conclude, because the understanding of life after death runs the whole gamut of human experience, cultural values. And the conclusion is that, hey, man invented religion and religious beliefs on an as needed basis to explain life's experiences and to offer solace from life's troubles. And I guess to keep things from being so scary, like, oh, what's the nothingness, like you said, oblivion. That's pretty scary for some people.
Sure. And if you think about the huge chunk of human history that human beings were existing in conditions that probably would be unimaginable to most modern humans. And you think about like in the Middle Ages, just the day-to-day life and how and how difficult it was, how much more suffering there was, how much more dangerous the world was overall. it makes sense. It makes sense to cling to this idea that, yeah, this is really difficult, but it doesn't really matter what happens here because, once I die, I'll pass on to an existence where I'm free of this blight.
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense. So just like in the same way that we've talked before about, you know, what's the eclipse of the sun? We had to create some story of there's a God pulling this thing across the front of the sun or whatever it is, right?
Sure,
Because
sure.
it's scary or it's just a way to cope, like you said, I guess. That's so is that all there is then? That's that, like, as far as if we're thinking about, hey, it's just there's going to be nothingness, the whole thing, all the stuff people think about being immortal and living a next life and all that, it's just wrong. They're fooling themselves.
Well, who can say? I mean, no, I don't, no one can say for certain,
Sure,
but
sure.
but I think, to go back to my previous point about once we've existed, it's very difficult to imagine not existing. I would ask you, what year were you born in?
Me? Well, I was
Yeah,
born in 1968.
1968. So where were you in 1966?
Nowhere. Yeah.
Nowhere. And I think that's like a thought exercise that I have kind of walked through, whenever I've thought about, okay, what do I think happens when you die? Is it really oblivion? Because I've had conversations where people say like, yeah, I'm not really afraid of death because what's the difference to me? I'm not going to know that I'm dead. So what does it matter?
Sure, sure.
But yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, is to think like, I was born in 1980. And so I think about like in the 1970s, the world was spinning, people were living their lives, having experiences. I simply didn't exist, and I won't exist again.
Yeah, the merry-go-round was going around though, like
Right.
your grandfather said, right?
Right. I was waiting in line.
There you go. So if we're not immortal, then we will all die one day. We've said that. And for those who have great faith in an afterlife, I would say this: still, you're going to die one day, right?
Yeah.
And your your faith that you have that there's more, okay. But to me, it's we are all going to die from this life one day. What does that mean, in your opinion, Ben, to how we should live right now?
I do want to answer that question, but it's funny, man, as we're talking, and I'll edit this part out. This is just you and me talking here
Yeah.
for a second. But a lot of what we're kind of touching on here, I uh, really considered quite carefully when I was writing the ceremony for Sarah and I's in my wedding. So I wrote the ceremony myself because we didn't do like a traditional religious wedding ceremony.
Okay.
And I, it's just kind of, it's striking me how much overlap there is. I mean, to some of the things, because I wrote about how I kind of took the opposite approach to your typical, like, oh, it's till death do you part. And then even then you'll pass into the afterlife together and you're going to be happy for, and no, my thing was basically like, look, with this, all of this is fleeting. And in like, in 300 years, when okay, this is a little depressing. It wasn't this exactly. It was more poetic, but it was
Yeah.
basically saying like, in 300 years, like we're going to be dead. We're not going to be here anymore. All the people standing here, our friends and family watching us get married, they're all going to be gone. No living memory of this day will remain. But that does not change the fact that you and I stood here and took these vows to each other. And I don't know. I was going to just
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe I would reference part of it, but I couldn't find it in the moment. Sorry.
You
Sorry for
need
that.
you need a guy like Joe Rogan has to look all this shit up, man.
Right. He's like, yeah, I feel like, yeah, Mark, pull up that ceremony that I wrote for Sarah and my wedding.
Yeah. All right. So back to it. If we are not immortal, we all will die one day. What does that mean to how we should live?
Okay. I think the implication is that certainly there's value in recognizing that this is all temporary, in that, um, I don't want to say the result should be pure hedonism, but I think there's value in recognizing that, we're not going to be here forever. And, people say this a lot, like, well, life is short. Don't hold petty grudges. Life is too short. Well, that's true. Life is short in the grand scheme of things. And I think that people should strive to, um, in acknowledging that, you should strive to live a life that lets you, contribute to the world, as we talked about on other episodes, can contribute to the greater good, be good to your fellow human beings, and take pleasure in and enjoy certain aspects of the human experience. And this is another, issue that I take with religion, is that I feel like religion is often, um, prescribing a, um, what's the word?
Controlled,
Well, yeah, like,
sort of like, hey, don't let it all loose and have that much fun because that's bad.
well,
And really, why? Because maybe you won't be treated as well in the afterlife or whatever because of the way you acted. But like, I'm not saying to mistreat people, but maybe like take a little bit of advantage of some of the great things that are here.
yeah, it seems to forbid a lot of the most basic, human pleasures. It's like, um,
Like
you
very
know,
self um what's like inhibiting yourself and really holding back and not really indulging in everything that you could indulge in, although like you said, not hedonism, but for me, for instance, I think about like our last episode, finding purpose, like to be able to do that and have purpose, something that fulfills you, that helps others, that helps the bigger picture, but also makes you so happy and allows you to be so productive and have a meaningful existence by finding your purpose. Like just like that is that's what I'm saying. How we should live is that way, not just hedonistically and like, oh, do whatever you want to do because it doesn't matter.
sure. And also not living for this idea that, like, okay, whatever happens here is, it doesn't really matter, because my true life and true happiness will be, after I die, and I pass on to whatever's next.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about those people who do have faith that there's an afterlife? Like, could they be putting off, based upon what we were talking about? They're putting off important things they could be doing now because they're waiting for, like, hey, in heaven or in wherever it is, I'll be good. I'll be fine. I understand you talked about in the medieval times, like, man, life was so harsh. It's good to have something to think about, to look forward to, because some of the daily struggles, it just helped you have hope, like those rats in the water, right? But, but I mean, could those people who have faith, like, no, no, I'm gonna be very good. I'm gonna totally control myself. I'm gonna live this certain, very controlled way. Are they wasting time? Could they be wasting time?
They certainly could be wasting time. I think even more certain than the wasting of time is the wasting of their true, potential, and the true potential of the human experience that they could be having, if they took a more reason-based view of the human lifespan, the human experience, and the actual. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's simply no evidence whatsoever for
Yeah.
this Caribbean cruise that people think that they go on after they
And,
die.
and I like how you put that. And that being said, is it just an insurance policy though? I've known people who are like, well, I'm not really religious, but you go to church every Sunday and you give a little bit of money and you partake in some holidays. And if it is all real, then should be good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Look,
Mm-hmm. Just kind of hedging their bets.
yeah, in case if it is real, then I should be good. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good way to look at it.
Well, that makes me sad, because that means that all those many hours that those folks spend, sitting on the pew, or whatever it is they're doing, they could have been doing something actually fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah,
instead of
absolutely.
instead of just trying to, instead of just trying to buy their way into the pearly gates.
Yeah, and if those who have faith in an afterlife and religion, if they are right, I think people who were maybe not sitting in the pew, like you said, for an example, but people who are out there self-actualizing, finding their purpose, helping others, contributing to society, I think that person, if it was all true, probably someone's going to say, yeah, you know what, you're good to go too.
Yeah, exactly. No, I've heard it said that, you could be a totally good and decent person, but if you haven't invited Jesus Christ into your heart, you're not getting in. That just doesn't sound just.
Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. So I would say, I'm saying, hey, for me, religious or not, if you're religious, I mean, still do everything to pursue your best life now and contribute and to help people and to be nice and kind and good. And if that afterlife is true that you have faith in, then that's a bonus, I guess, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, this is as far as I can put it, I guess.
Sure.
My question then, I have a question when we're talking about this. It sort of goes back to what those anthropologists thought. Like, so is it possible that religion or religious belief, it's just an organized way that people used to try to say, hey, let's get everyone to do good things and be good and be the best person you can here and now?
Yeah, great question. It would be difficult to say that was the case. I mean, I don't know that the Bible, for example, is or provides a very moral framework. I mean, I think one of the most glaring examples is that the Bible does not condone slavery. The Bible gives many instructions on how to kind of manage affairs in a world where slavery is common and legal. So
So it just acknowledges that, hey, this is something that happens. And
right. And you would think like, okay, well, if this is really it's supposed to serve as a moral framework for us and like give us instructions on how to live, like, how to live well, how to live properly. Well, certainly you would think that it would condemn slavery.
certain things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I get you. So I guess like if I think about the Greek gods or the god of the sun, of the sea, like as a way to explain, it definitely was a way to explain, like, hey, here's things we don't understand.
Yeah.
There's someone back down there who pushes all the ocean around, makes the waves and all that stuff, right? So, and people say, okay, yeah, I mean, because we didn't have science at the time to be able to explain what really was the case. So, but maybe it's almost like that. That was my thought when I had this question: is was religion? It's like we used it to explain nature. Did we use religion to try? Maybe a couple people came together and decided we have to use religion now, not to explain nature, but to explain how we should all try to get along together and be nice to each other. Like, I don't know, right?
Yeah, I would. Well, that's what I'm saying. I would argue that it doesn't really even do that
Yeah,
last thing. I mean, certainly, the human mind, even the mind of our ancient ancestors pre-science, the human mind is curious. It seeks to understand the world around it, and outside of scientific understanding, we tell stories to try to make sense of the world. The second thing that I'll say is, and I think this is something that you've hit on before, is that there's there's plenty of evidence, and there's plenty of ways to look at religion historically, especially like the Catholic Church, for example, as a um, I guess you would call it a mechanism of control. I mean, these were very powerful organizations that exerted a tremendous amount of control over global politics and certain um, wars and just, I think the human experience throughout history has been largely shaped and even dictated in a lot of eras by religion.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And when you think about that power, I guess then it's just maybe it's just more of a rationalization. I actually recently read a book, can't remember the name of the book or in what context it was, but there was some excerpts from some writings that have had been translated from the Spanish conquistadors. And they would actually go, this is an example of like the rationalization of it. It was like they'd go in front these with these guys with their guns and their horses and their armor and all this stuff that looks really out of this world. They'd meet with Indians and start speaking in Spanish to them. No, they don't now. The Indians didn't know Spanish, and they're basically saying, "Hey, our God has given us this, in a nutshell." And it was a very long excerpt that I was reading. If you don't comply and become Christian right now, like we're going to have to destroy you, and we are taking all your lands because it's in your best interest.
Hmm.
And like it was like the type of thing like, okay, you've got 10 seconds to decide,
Yeah, yeah,
and then like they didn't. So then they were rationally in their heads like, well, we're doing God's work, so
yep,
let's just destroy all these people and then make them slaves or whatever. So just really a handle for power. So maybe religion was not something, like I said, my question to answer that myself, not an organized way that people use to try to have a path for people to follow in order to self-actualize and be the best they could be, but a rationalization for people to do the things they wanted to do to get them ahead of others when necessary. And of course, it all started way back just trying to explain nature and explain things that weren't understandable. So,
yeah. As I often say, and I've said on the podcast before, we are all the heroes of our own story, right?
yep, yep, absolutely, absolutely. So, all right. So, what do you think about it? What will you do is my question now. Like, if you believe we just have this one life, which I feel like you do,
I do.
um, and also for those who have faith that there is more, should you, either person, change your approach to life? Well, or is your approach to life already in line with you're thinking, hey, we have one life to live, one and done. Let's do this.
Well, I think it's good to bear in mind that, right, no one knows what happens after you die. And, again, not to put too fine a point on it, all of the evidence, or I should say the overwhelming lack of evidence for an afterlife, suggests, at least to me, that what we could expect and should probably expect is oblivion. And, like you said, if it turns out that's not the case, if it turns out that you're there, that you're actually reincarnated, and, one moment you're lying in a hospital bed as an old man, and the next moment you're um, springing back into consciousness as a caterpillar. Who knows? Maybe that's a bonus.
Yeah, man, that's just bonus. And what would it?
Right.
Yeah. I
I
thought you
mean,
were. I thought you were going to say springing back into the consciousness as a little baby, but you went to caterpillar. That threw me.
well, yeah, because if you think about like reincarnation, well, what's to say that you come back as a person? I mean, maybe people that are you know walking around as a human is just that you won the lottery on that trip.
Yeah,
And
or maybe didn't win the lottery. Maybe you lost horribly and became a miserable human with all these realizations and things to talk about, and things instead of just being like a happy dog with their tail wagging, living with hopefully a good family that feeds it and takes it for walks. Right?
sure, sure, yeah. But so, anyways, I would say that I think that at least recognizing the possibility that this could be it could only lead to, while of course painful to bear at times, could only lead to a healthier perspective on the human experience, and hopefully a more fulfilling and enriched life, if you kind of take each day as precious, and accept that this might be all there is, and you might as well enjoy the ride.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a good way to put it. I think about like even if there was an afterlife, like still you're like, hey, this is I'm here in this. If there was, and I'm not saying I believe there is, but even if there was, wouldn't anyone say, "Hey, but I'm here now, and I have this." It's like being in a baseball game, and it's, hey, it's your turn at bat. You just go up there and not try to hit it. Like, try to hit the ball.
Mhm.
See what you can do. Can you get around the bases? Can you hit it out of the park?
Well,
You're just going to sit there and watch the pitches go by
if
and
you're if
say,
you're
well, after the game, we're going to get pizza. So that's what I'm waiting for. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, but then imagine if someone was telling you, all right, now if you get up to the plate and you swing at the ball, you're gonna jeopardize your chance at the pizza party.
Yeah, that's a hard spot to be in for a kid. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So maybe that's what you just said there about that. Maybe that's why people are like, even if they maybe are like you and I seem to be about religion a little bit. We've talked about it before. Maybe people are like, yeah, I sort of the logic doesn't seem like it's all there, but I just can't take the chance. I'm gonna still believe.
Mhm.
You think that happens?
Well, I don't know that belief is something that people choose. You know what I mean? I think that there's a lot of things that go into it. Of course, like where you're born, how you're raised, the family that you grow up in, your kind of personality and outlook. All of those things will like shape a person's worldview. Now, I myself, I'm just a very skeptical person by nature, and I didn't really grow up s- steeped in religion the way that some people do. So I think it makes sense that I would grow up to be a skeptical atheist. Um, but I think even people who believe, I don't think people make that choice for themselves. I think that some people are sold, uh, an idea. Some people buy it and internalize it, and it becomes part of how they view themselves and view themselves in the world itself. But I don't know that the belief, I don't think people decide for themselves like, yes, I'm going to believe in this or I'm not. I mean, I don't believe because I haven't been convinced.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. It's just so interesting to me, though, that someone could be. I mean, I could understand that as growing up as a young child and everything, but then when someone becomes an adult, has some life experience, sees other cultures, understands that things are different in different places, and maybe get some education. I just can't. To me, it's almost impossible for me to imagine that someone wouldn't just question and be like, well, even though I've always assumed this to be the case, let's say they're very religious for whatever religion it is, that they wouldn't have a point where they're like, is that really like, am I so sure about that?
Yeah.
Like, but I do know some adult people who have never, ever, from what I know and from the way they act, never ever had a second thought about it. And
Hmm.
they're just like, if you ask them, do you really, have you ever thought? They'd be like, yeah, it's good to go. I believe, and there's an afterlife. But I do think when we talk about mortality, if you just have this one life, to me, it's still like you have to try to be the best you can, do the best things, be the best you can be. I think people should, and I don't think doing that with your life would hurt your chances if there is an afterlife.
Hmm. Yeah. Certainly the question of like, well, okay, so you're a good person, you do good things, you really try to be a best, you're conscientious. Uh, you come to the end of this life and you find that like, oh, it was all true. Here I am. I'm standing at the gates. I'm being judged. Would you even want to be a part of a system that turns away good people because they failed to believe uh, on bad evidence?
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. It's a hell of a place to be. So that leads me to this then. So if we die and there's nothing, why do we care about it? Why do anything? There's the famous Russian writer. Who's this guy oh man, I can't think of his name, but he was basically like, the best way, knowing that nothing matters at all, is just suicide. Suicide's the best way, because
Hmm.
otherwise you're pretending. I forget who this is. It's very famous. You'd be like, oh, that guy. I was just reading about this about a month ago, and I read he had three things, like either you're just stupid and you don't understand that everything means nothing. Or B, you understand that everything is nothing, but you just try to have as much fun with it as you can now. Or he said, the third and most logical thing to do is like, it matters, just kill yourself type of deal. But does it really matter at all what we do? What would be the difference? Why not just be a piece of crap, a person who just, tries to just to suck off the system, take advantage of others, steal things when you need it, do as little work as possible, all that stuff.
Because there's an experience that is bigger than us and our actions, right? We're part of a living organism. And I think we got into this in the last episode a little bit, but we're the world that humans have created is bigger than any one individual human. And although we will die and no longer be here, the world that we are shaping will be, and it will be occupied by people who don't exist yet. And their time will be limited too. And their effects on the world, they're going to get off the merry-go-round, so to speak. And the merry-go-round will be as they left it. And I don't know, maybe we're obligated to those folks who are waiting in line while we're on the ride, that we leave them something good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I was thinking when you were saying that of something, I heard Jordan Peterson say, and most people probably know him. If not, you should check him out. He's got some interesting things to say, some interesting books and everything. Um, and he said it was, I think he was talking on religion actually at the time, but I think it was a YouTube cut, but he said the pain, the suffering, the joy, the heartache, like all of these emotions and good times and bad times, the happiness and when people say, if nothing ever even matters, if there's nothing after if when you're gone, there's nothing and no one will remember you at all in 100 years, why does it all matter? He said, it matters just for the experience. It's worth it to go through life and live, and because of the experience.
Right. Because the alternative is nothingness. And in any experience, any temporary experience is better than nothingness, has more value than nothingness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's not hard to prove. Something's better than nothing. So, but we've talked about this, I think, in another episode a little bit, but I wanted to say maybe we are immortal in a way, not like those jellyfish, right? But I think in the parenting episode, passing on your genes to future generations. Your genes, you might have like some DNA, something in your genes, in your DNA that might be like, hey, you did this one great thing and it really worked for you. And that ability is going to be passed on to your children and then their children. And then, 1,000 years down the line, someone who doesn't even know they're related to you, they might be going through something tough in their lives and they have to overcome something. And then they turn on that little part of that strand. They enable something that was already there because you put it there, and it's been dormant this whole time, far in the future. And that little part of you can help them get better, overcome something, become a better person, self-actualize, and be the best person they can be. And part of that's you. Does that count as you being sort of immortal?
I would say so. And I would almost reframe it and ask it this way. Like, that could be you or I. And our great, 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 great grandfathers, had some quality that has, been passed down through the generations and is within us. I mean, maybe that's,
Yeah, you could look at that way. Even think all the way back to like, some, caveman days, like the most simple humans, like this one person who you could be related to is like the first guy who's like, hey, we should put a shelter up something over our heads if we can't find a cave, and we should start a fire, and we should befriend these dogs because they can be an alert system for predators. And like, wow, like help you even be here. Like if that person wasn't successful in their struggle, and part of you have part of that, and that might help you when you come through a struggle in life, which is not as probably great and dire struggle as maybe that caveman went through, in a physical sense, but you have something, and something about that person's resilience, that person's ability to work out a problem, that person's stick to itiveness, that they're just not going to quit.
Sure.
That is in you and helps you to overcome your problem.
Well, even to zoom out a little bit, but to stay with the caveman analogy, which is always kind of an interesting test bed for ideas when you think about, working backwards through generations to a point in time where there was nothing but human beings, were living in the natural world. I mean, there was no, sometimes I think about this, it blows my mind to think that we existed in a world where there was no house, there were no houses, there were no, there were no hospitals, there was no infrastructure at all. Well, I think that modern humans have lost the ability to adapt and survive in that kind of world. Obviously, our ancestors did it, and it was very difficult. If you zoom out a little bit, we're all essentially standing on the shoulders of our ancestors and their struggles and their discoveries, their ability to make life easier. Like you said, if we can't live in a cave, we'll build our own shelter here. We'll get a fire going. Oh, look, if you take this meat and you put it over the fire, it tastes better and is easier to digest and is more nutritious. And on and on and on, those things get handed down until you and I and everyone listening to this and everyone else walking around now, we are born into a modern age that we didn't create, but that we benefit from.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that I could get along with. If someone said, Steve, you are immortal because 1,000 years from now, just like 1,000 years before you, um, that lineage has been passed on.
Yeah.
So part of you, literally, a part of what makes you who you are today will be in another person, people in the future. So
People who don't even know your name and
yeah,
wouldn't know it's a single thing about you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I can get along with that in terms of immortality, much more than I could wrap my brain around, you know, like I grew up, you go to heaven if you're good type of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, so, we've talked a lot about this so far, and I think like it seems like we're agreeing, but final thoughts and how to maybe move forward in life while taking proper actions. To me, I'm gonna quote one of my favorite movies, Ben. This is do you know the movie Vision Quest?
I've definitely heard the name. I don't
Yeah.
think I've ever seen it.
Yeah, it's with Matthew Modine, and he's a wrestler in high school, and he decides, it's the movie's probably 1985, 1986, and he decides, hey, I'm going to cut weight, move to a different weight class, and wrestle the state champ who's hadn't been beaten in years. People are like, you're crazy. And so he's just like, no, I want to make my mark. I want to do something incredible. And so the movie sort of revolves around this. But at one point, he's in English class. He's a senior in high school, and they're reading a poem. And the professor says, "What do you think about that?" And the poem was someone sort of talking about the fall and the leaves falling and all this stuff. And it was clearly like a metaphor for death and,
Mm-hmm.
from spring to fall and everything. And he said, "So what do you think about that?" And Loudon Swain said, and I'm quoting because I did go back and look at the clip because I love it so much. He says, "I don't know. Nobody likes to think about it, I don't like to think about it. But if you don't, you might go through life thinking you've got plenty of time. You put off the really important stuff until later. Pretty soon, before you know it, there's no more time left. You've blown it, unquote. So he's talking about, and that's exactly a great way when I thought about this mortality. You better get going, do what you want to do. Don't put off the really important stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Live your life because for all you know, regardless of where your faith lies, for all you know, for all you could prove, it could be the only one you'll have.
Mm-hmm.
So do it the best you can, respect all others and all other types of life, and do good, be the best, be the best person you can be, and try to contribute.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that quote a lot. And the only other thing I'll add is, and I'm sure I've said this in other episodes, but it bears repeating that even if you live to be 80 or 100, in our case, even that is very short in the grand scheme of things. That's not really a lot of time, but a lot of people don't even get that. I mean, as I've said before, the news is filled with stories about people who woke up in the morning and had no idea that it was going to be their last day on earth. And of course, you have to balance that with, I guess this comes back to what we were saying about hedonism. You have to there has to be some thought and consideration for the future and tomorrow, plan for a long retirement and plan to be around, take care of yourself. But recognize that we hang by a fragile thread.
Yeah, I well said. And I would also say, when you were saying that, I think about, everyone you come in contact with in life, you have impact on, whether you like it or not. And just remember that going forward, treat people right. Some people that you have run in with, they might remember you for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And to you, you might not remember it, but so think about, what do you want it to be? They're remembering you for the rest of your life because of how rotten and mean and cruel you were, or because they were like, wow, that was really, really nice. I guess one friend of mine used to say, ride that horse till it falls over, man.
But yeah, I mean, at least try to like enjoy your life and make the most of it, because it's short and there are no guarantees, despite your faith.
All right. So I would say this. I want to say thanks so much for listening. And I was looking the other day on the platform, Ben, and I just wanted to say thanks to the listeners in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Italy, in Canada, Australia, Brazil, and most recently, within the last week, Romania.
Hey,
Thank you for listening. And if you'd like a topic that you'd like to hear discussed, knowing that we're sort of trending philosophical now, drop us a line at benstevebalancedpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
Balanced is produced by myself and Steve. Our music is by Four Giants. If you enjoyed this discussion and you'd like to hear more balanced conversations, hit subscribe or follow. We would really appreciate it. This is Ben.
And this is Steve.
And we are balanced.